Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere a little grimier, a little louder, to a time of plagues and punishments. We're slipping straight into the real Middle Ages, not the shiny, armor-polished fantasy version, but the one with unpleasant smells, strange punishments, and breakfast that actively resents you. Forget knights rescuing princesses. Forget elegant feasts. The actual medieval world was a place where you would absolutely not survive long enough to complain about it. Before we jump in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of late-night historical suffering. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what ungodly hour it is over there. I love seeing people tuning in from all over the planet, unable to sleep for reasons that usually don't involve medieval sanitation. Now lower the lights, turn on a fan for that soothing hum, and settle in, because you've just regained consciousness in the year 1325. The good news? You exist. The bad news? So does everything else, especially the fleas. Your bed, if you can call it that, is a collapsing sack of damp straw that crunches when you move and twitches when you don't. It's packed with hay, insects, and probably a few things that used to be alive, but aren't anymore. Memory foam? Never heard of her. Your mattress smells like a stable, because it almost certainly was one not too long ago. The blanket wrapping you like a medieval burrito is made of itchy wool, heavy with months of grime, smoke, sweat, and the faint suggestion of goat. It weighs approximately as much as a stubborn toddler, and somehow absorbs cold instead of warmth. You blink yourself awake as a church bell thunders in the distance, the medieval alarm clock, equally unkind and significantly louder. Your home is a masterpiece of rustic misery. One room, no glass windows, and a floor plan best described as everybody shares everything whether they want to or not. This includes your spouse, children, visiting relatives, chickens, and whichever rodents have decided to claim a corner as their rightful estate. The general scent of the place is complex. Notes of stale ale, unwashed humanity, wet wool, and a mysterious something in the corner you hope is a turnip, but is probably not. There are no candles unless you're wealthy, which you aren't. If you tried lighting one, it would simply melt into the dirt floor like a sad wax pancake. You sit up and every vertebra in your back pops like a string of firecrackers. You're 22, which makes you a seasoned adult by medieval standards. Your knees sound like a bag of gravel being stirred by a disappointed monk. Outside, the sky is gray, because medieval skies are always gray. You attempt to stand, but the floor greets you with either a wet squelch or a crispy crunch, depending on last night's rain and the mood of your livestock. Privacy? A hallucination. Everyone around you is awake now, blinking through the cold air and accepting the reality of yet another day spent not dying. Even if you crave just 5 minutes alone, parasites will accompany you. They go where you go. They are loyal that way. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe. It truly only gets worse from here. You stagger upright because nature is shouting, not whispering. In the modern world, going to the bathroom is a peaceful, private ritual. Here, it is a nightmare with audience participation. There is no toilet, no seat, no paper, no door. Your options are a wooden bucket, a pit, or the innovative anywhere that isn't inside. If you're a peasant, you shuffle outside to a bucket that is somehow always full. Last night your cousin, who drinks like every day, is a feast day contributed generously, and now the stench drifting off the thing could qualify as a military weapon. You hold your breath, do what must be done, and then empty it straight into the alley behind your home. That's right. The entire village participates in a daily ritual of throw mystery waste into the street. Technically, you're supposed to shout, "Gardy Lou," which means duck and cover. But the warning system is flawed because no one ever moves fast enough. Streets function as open sewers, a fragrant soup of mud, manure, and fluids you do not want described. If your town has public latrines, congratulations. You now get to sit in a drafty wooden building, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, performing your morning duties while making awkward eye contact. Ventilation, 0. Smell, apocalyptic. Toilet paper, never invented. You wipe with straw, moss, scraps of fabric, or your own personal despair. Many people wipe with nothing. This is why handshakes had not yet become popular. If you're fancy enough to live in a castle, you may have a garderobe, a hole in the wall where your waist plummets straight down into the moat. A wonderful system, unless the enemy army decides to enter the castle the same way your waist exits it. Yes, invaders really did climb up sewage chutes. They were extremely motivated. By now you're filthy, freezing, and extremely humble. Perfect timing for breakfast. You return inside, hoping for something warm and comforting. Unfortunately, you live in a century where breakfast is not a meal. It's a warning. You gather around the fire, or what remains of it, to a bowl of something. Your morning pottage is a sludgy stew that never ends, literally. It stays in the pot forever, and every day someone throws new vegetables into the old mixture. It's not cooked so much as continuously alive. The bread beside it is a brick disguised as food. It's coarse, stale, and often padded with sawdust or crushed tree bark, because flour is expensive and peasants are not. This loaf could be used as a weapon or a building material. You wash it all down with weak ale, because the water is basically medieval roulette. Drink from the river, and you will meet your ancestors by Friday. So you drink beer at dawn, like a toddler at a Viking festival. If you ask for meat or cheese, people will laugh. Those exist only on feast days or when someone's goat dies unexpectedly. And that, my friend, is your medieval morning routine. No yoga mat, no herbal tea, just fleas, filth, and food that hates you. Welcome to the Middle Ages. It's going to be a long day. Most peasants in the Middle Ages don't exactly feast. Meat is a rare guest at the table, the kind of thing you taste on major holidays or when a farm. Animal dies of natural causes, and everyone pretends it was planned. Fresh fruit? Only if it's hanging off a tree at that very moment and hasn't already been turned into something alcoholic. And spices? Please. Unless your last name is something like D something of importance. The closest you'll ever get to pepper is hearing someone wealthier describe what it tastes like. A single pinch of the stuff could cost more than your entire month of backbreaking labor. Salt is precious enough to be treated like treasure. It's locked up, rationed, measured. If you're lucky, you get a few gritty grains here and there to sprinkle onto your bread, which is so coarse you could probably use it to sand down lumber. Meanwhile, you try very hard not to think about the possibility that a rat, or several of them, held a small midnight banquet in your porridge pot while you slept. Breakfast doesn't give you energy. Breakfast is simply something that happens in your general direction. Now that you've filled yourself with barely food, it's time to work as though the universe has a personal vendetta against you. But first, getting dressed, which is far more depressing than the pottage you just swallowed. Your wardrobe contains exactly one outfit. 1. You're not choosing clothes. You're negotiating with the only garment you own, a rough wool tunic or a scratchy linen shift that you've worn every day. For so long, it might legally be considered part of your body. Fashion doesn't exist. Styles don't change. You wear this until it physically disintegrates, or until the odor gains enough self-awareness to file for independence. Underwear? Optional, luxurious, rare. If you have a linen undertunic, someone up there loves you. If not, you're spending your entire day going commando under layers of wool that feel like 1,000 angry hedgehogs, performing interpretive dance against your skin. Soap isn't a thing. Washing machines definitely aren't. Dry cleaners? You're adorable. Your clothes are stiff, stained, and carry a scent best described as swamp creature with emotional issues. Washing them would require hauling water from a cold river, heating it over a fire that doesn't want to stay lit, and scrubbing the fabric with ashes or lye, all so your tunic can smell slightly less like someone died in it. Shoes? If you're blessed enough to own any, they're made of flimsy leather, tied together with hope and minimal stitching. They offer the same support as a soggy cracker. Most peasants just go barefoot across mud, manure, and medieval land hazards like splintered wood, broken pottery, and puddles that contain more bacteria than scientific vocabulary currently allows. Your skin is in open rebellion. It itches constantly. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs are your permanent roommates. Everyone has them: nobles, monks, screaming toddlers. The entire population is essentially one massive mobile insect festival. You'll absent-mindedly scratch your armpit with whatever tool is nearby while talking to the priest, and he won't even blink. It's simply what life is. Your scalp is a war zone. Your arms and legs are riddled with bites. If you develop a rash, you just hope it doesn't spread too quickly. There's no cream, no doctor, no one leaning in to say, "That's probably fungal." You just live with it. And if it doesn't kill you, congratulations. You have a new companion for the next several months. Now that you're fully dressed in misery and wool, it's time to step outside and begin the back-breaking daily grind. But before you can even get to the fields, you flash what should be a friendly morning smile. Except you don't, because nothing about your teeth is friendly. In the Middle Ages, smiling is risky. Not emotionally, mentally. There are no toothbrushes, no toothpaste, no floss, no minty anything. The closest thing to dental care is occasionally chewing on a twig like a nervous beaver. Some rinse their mouths with wine or vinegar, but that's less hygiene and more, "Let's hope this burns away the problem." Your teeth are entirely on their own, and they are losing. By your mid-20s, your smile looks like it belongs on the cover of a horror manuscript. Cavities run rampant. Your gums are swollen, bleeding, and permanently unhappy. The brown stains on your teeth aren't coffee, they're decay. You have more rot in your mouth than a medieval root cellar. Sugar exists mostly for the wealthy, imported at outrageous cost, which means nobles get to ruin their teeth faster. If you're poor, the destruction is slow but steady, thanks to the daily grind of chewing tough bread, gritty stew, and whatever else your jaw can handle. Toothaches are a constant companion. They're like medieval weather, always present, always slightly worse than you hoped. The kind of dull, throbbing pain that makes you consider prayer, screaming, or removing the tooth with your bare hands. And that was actually a treatment. Barber surgeons, the same cheerful souls who cut your hair, also performed dental extractions using metal hooks, candlelight, and enthusiasm. No anesthesia, no hygiene. Just grip, twist, scream, hope. If an infected tooth spreads, without antibiotics, you can genuinely die from it. Yes, a toothache can be fatal in the 1300s. Something you would fix with a $12 pharmacy run today could have been your obituary back then. Kissing? Good luck. Bad breath is universal. Romance is judged by property, livestock, and your father's handshake skills, not your gleaming white smile, because nobody has one. Your mouth is a battleground, and there is no winning side. So your teeth are throbbing, your clothes are itching, your stomach is half fed, and now it's time to head to work. Except work isn't a job. It's a survival marathon with no finish line. If you're like 9 out of 10 medieval people, you're a peasant. Your job is brutally simple. Stay alive long enough to give your landlord his due. You work land that isn't yours for a lord who forgets your name from sunrise until the sky goes black. You plow with your hands, or if you're incredibly lucky, with an ox that listens to you about as well as a brick wall. You dig trenches, plant seeds, haul water, pull weeds, and hope your back doesn't snap in half like an underbaked biscuit. No one cares if you're exhausted. No one asks about your feelings. No one says, take a break. This is your life. This is your job. And the sun has barely risen. If you're a woman in medieval Europe, surprise, you're not just doing farm work. Oh no. You're running a full-scale household operation on top of that. You're chasing children, stirring pots, spinning wool, feeding chickens, milking goats, brewing ale, mending clothes, and pretending that your husband's expanding lice colony isn't steadily migrating toward your pillow. Every day is multitasking on nightmare mode. Kids get no childhood either. By age 5, they're miniature adults with tiny chores. Carrying water, shoeing geese, picking stones from the soil, all while praying they don't catch a fever that ends their entire storyline. Toys? Please. A stick, a rock, and the crushing pressure of survival is all they get. School is a myth unless you're a noble or a monk, and even then, most lessons involve memorizing things under threat of being smacked with a stick. And maybe, just maybe, you're one of the few people lucky enough to have an actual trade. Blacksmith, tanner, cobbler, cooper, you know, jobs that involve fire, caustic chemicals, oiling glue, or animal guts. You spend your day inhaling fumes strong enough to stun a horse. Your workspace is a dim shed that doubles as a heat trap in summer and a meat freezer in winter. The pay? Barely enough to keep you alive. The benefits? Occasional dizziness and the possibility of losing a finger. Get sick? Too bad. You're still working unless the infection physically knocks you off your feet. No sick leave. No rest days. No sympathy. Medieval society is powered by brute endurance, not comfort. If you can move, you work. If you can't, someone else does your job and takes your place. That's the medieval retirement plan. Someone younger, stronger, or simply less ill replaces you. So you grip your battered tools, ignore the blister blossoming on your paw, and keep going. Because in the Middle Ages, your career path is simple. Survive until sunset and do it again tomorrow. But before you get too cozy in your misery, let's talk about the weather, because the weather is your greatest, most relentless enemy. Winter in the Middle Ages is not festive. It is not magical. It is not cozy. Winter is suffering in climate form. Your house is made of warped wood, with gaps so wide that a determined chicken could march straight through your living room. The windows are covered with thin cloth, which blocks the wind about as effectively as a wish. Insulation doesn't exist. Your one wool tunic always feels damp, somehow colder inside than outside, and the moment you get near the fire, smoke fills your lungs like a medieval vape pen. Firewood is precious, expensive, and in many places, gathering fallen branches is illegal. Yes, illegal. The king basically owns the entire forest, and picking up a stick without permission could get you fined, flogged, or in extreme cases, executed. So you shiver, teeth rattling, wrapped in a damp blanket that smells vaguely of mildew and regret. Frostbite isn't diagnosed. It's just something that happens to you, while everyone politely pretends not to notice your toes turning blue. Then comes summer. You think the warmth might bring relief. Wrong again. Summer is its own torture device. Your home transforms into a cramped oven. The air sits heavy, unmoving, and filled with scents that words were not designed to describe. Bathing? Rare? Deodorant? Doesn't exist. Hygiene? Optional. Your one tunic is glued to your skin from sweat, but you can't take it off unless you want gossip, sunburn, and mosquito bites the size of walnuts. Flies swarm your face. Gnats dive bomb your eyeballs. Mosquitoes treat you like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Last week's stew is still festering in a corner pot, attracting every insect within 10 miles. Sleeping is a joke. There's no breeze. The baby's crying. The dog is scratching fleas. And your neighbors are loudly arguing through paper-thin walls made of sticks. In the fields, the sun roasts you like bread crust. No sunscreen. No hat unless you're crafty enough to braid straw into a lopsided dome. Heat stroke isn't recognized as an illness. It's just called being weak of constitution, followed by fainting face first into barley. So whether you're freezing or melting, one constant remains. Life is uncomfortable, and the sky hates you. Feeling thirsty? Want to rinse your face? Want to sip something refreshing? Medieval water has entered the chat, and it's here to ruin your day. The stream nearby looks beautiful, sparkling, clear, inviting, but don't be fooled. Upstream, someone absolutely just dumped their chamber pot into it. If not that, then a dead goat is decaying there like a medieval flotation device. Every sip is an invitation for dysentery to set up camp inside your intestines. This is why medieval people drink beer, even toddlers. But they're not sipping craft brews. It's small beer, watery, weak, barely alcoholic, and brewed mostly for survival. The boiling kills enough germs to keep you alive. Wine is safer too, but only the wealthy can afford to black out at breakfast. What about bathing? Surely water is used for that. In theory, yes. In practice, not even close. Many people believe bathing actually opens your pores and lets diseases slip inside like unwanted houseguests. Dirt, they claim, forms a protective layer. So if you're filthy, congratulations, you're healthy. Bathhouses do exist, but they quickly develop reputations for scandal, sin, and steamy extracurricular activities. The church hates them so much it shuts most of them down. Even if you wanted to bathe, it's a logistical nightmare. First, haul water from a well. Then spend half your firewood boiling it. Fill a wooden tub that leaks like a cracked bucket. Climb in, hoping no one else used the water first. Or worse, hoping someone will use it after you, and then blame you for the smell. Rainwater is collected too, but it sits uncovered in barrels where bugs breed. Birds poop, animals fall in, and moss thrives. Refreshing, right? So whether you drink it, wash with it, or boil it, water is less of a life giver and more of a medieval roulette wheel. One wrong sip, and you'll spend your final days curled on a straw mattress, clinging to your stomach and whispering regrets into the darkness. If you ever feel grateful for modern plumbing, go ahead and thank every deity available. But let's say you do get sick. You stubbed your toe, drank bad water, or inhaled a lungful of smoke. You need help. Medical help. Too bad. You live in the Middle Ages, where medicine is mostly guesswork, superstition, and pain with a scholarly twist. Let's begin with the diagnosis. Everything that goes wrong with your body in the Middle Ages. Every cough, fever, rash, broken limb, or mysterious plaguey tingle is blamed on one magical theory. Your humors are out of whack. The four humors, according to medieval science, are blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Your health is basically a simmering broth, and if the ingredients get too spicy, congratulations, you're sick. Running a fever? Clearly too much blood. The obvious cure? Remove some. Nothing says healing like draining a person like a faulty wineskin. Physicians and barbers line up with bowls, rusty knives, and the boundless confidence of people who have zero idea what germs are. Yes, barbers. The same guy who trims your bangs will also rebalance your life force using leeches the size of baby sausages. Medieval 2-for-1 special. Feeling gloomy? Thinking too much? That's an excess of black bile. No problem. Just swallow a laxative strong enough to launch you into orbit, or sit very still while your family tries not to look directly at you in case sadness is contagious. A warm compress, some muttered prayers, and the silent preparation of your coffin complete the treatment plan. But if you break a bone or slice yourself open, that's when things get truly medieval. There's no anesthesia, unless you count fainting from shock. Surgery tools have not seen soap or sunshine in a decade. They're cleaned by waving them over a candle flame, not for sanitation, but because the sizzling sound reassures the surgeon. Germ theory won't exist for centuries, so any infection is chalked up to bad smells, sinful thoughts, or divine irritation. Stomach pain? Clearly a moral failing. Lucky you. You get to confess your sins while vomiting into a bucket that probably used to store turnips. If your condition worsens, they up the treatment. More leeches. More herbs that taste like disappointment. Maybe some ground beetles. And as you fade in and out of consciousness, a priest appears to begin your last rites. Just in case. And if you survive all this, the doctor declares victory, the priest thanks God, and the leech retires with honors. In short, medieval medicine isn't really medicine. It's surviving the cure. After enduring a day of sweat, toil, scratching, and involuntary blood donations, you limp back to your hut, stomach growling. Finally, dinner. A warm, comforting meal. Bad news. Dinner is trying to assassinate you. First problem. There's no refrigeration. At all. Your fresh meat has been hanging in the open air for days, attracting flies, absorbing questionable aromas, and possibly hosting a family of rodents who stopped paying rent months ago. Salt and smoke are your only preservation methods, so everything tastes like brine or bonfire. Bread is your staple. But this isn't soft, happy bakery bread. This is survival bread. Bread you could use as a blunt weapon. Bread so dense it might achieve sentience. And during bad harvests, peasants mix in bark, weeds, sawdust, or soil to stretch the flour. Yum? Rye bread comes with a special bonus, ergot, a delightful fungus that causes hallucinations, muscle spasms, and occasionally death. It's like eating a loaf dipped in homemade medieval LSD. Vegetables are seasonal and mostly boring. Turnips, more turnips. You can boil them, mash them, or throw them into pottage, the eternal stew bubbling in a pot that hasn't been fully emptied since your great-grandmother had teeth. Every day, new ingredients go in. Old ingredients? They simply become part of history. Fruit exists only for a few fleeting months. Without refrigeration, it rots fast, and sugar is a luxury reserved for nobles who want to show off their wealth by destroying their teeth in record time. Dairy? Riskier than unsupervised toddlers near a moat. Milk spoils almost instantly. Cheese and butter hold on longer, but are still battlegrounds of bacteria. And spices? Forget it. Pepper costs more than you'll earn in 6 months. Cinnamon is a royal-level flex. For peasants, flavor comes from onions, herbs if you grow them, and the faint aftertaste of despair. But the real kicker, hunting is illegal unless you're noble. Sneaking a rabbit into your pot can get you fined, jailed, or killed. Imagine dying because you tried to make dinner smell slightly less like pond water. So you sit by the fire, slurping your swamp-colored stew, hoping it nourishes you, or at least doesn't kill you before sunrise. After dinner comes the final part of your day, the spiritual inspection. It's evening now. You've worked yourself half to death, eaten the culinary equivalent of a punishment, and you're ready to collapse. Too bad as religion is mandatory. In medieval Europe, the church controls everything. Your daily schedule, your moral worth, your family life, your holidays, your finances. All of it funnels through the priest. You don't just attend church. You orbit it. Miss Mass? Sin. Eat meat on the wrong day? Sign. Think about your neighbor's spouse? Extra sin. Frown at a priest? Eternal sin? Do not pass go. Hell is described vividly, enthusiastically, and often. Fire, brimstone, demons with whips, lakes of torment. Medieval priests paint it like an amusement park brochure created by Satan's marketing team. You can't read scripture yourself because it's written in Latin. a language inaccessible to 99% of the population. So you rely entirely on clergy to interpret God's will, which conveniently aligns with their political goals, property disputes, and personal grudges. And then there are the tithes. 10% of everything you own: grain, chickens, eggs, money, wool, anything. If you own nothing, you still owe something. Somehow, holidays mean no work, but also no joy. They are reserved for fasting, prayer, processions, and contemplating your unworthiness. It's like mandatory spiritual homework. If you dare question the church, congratulations. You've just won an all-expenses-paid trip to being labeled a heretic. Punishments include flogging, exile, or fire. Lots of fire. Which brings us to the final twist: being a medieval woman. Because if you think being a man is rough, try surviving all this with childbirth, legal inferiority, constant judgment, non-stop labor, and zero bodily autonomy layered on top. It's the same medieval misery, just in hard mode. In the Middle Ages, being a woman is like loading into a video game on expert mode, except you don't get armor, upgrades, or even the courtesy of a tutorial. From the moment you're born, society essentially hands you a script: marry young, have babies early, work nonstop, die tired. No alternate endings. School? Only if you're lucky, noble, or accidentally end up in a convent where the highlight of your education is learning Latin hymns and how to embroider without bleeding on the cloth. For everyone else, learning stops right after you master milking goats and sewing patches onto clothing that's older than your father. Marriage arrives fast, disturbingly fast. Being promised by age 12 is normal, and becoming a mother before you've had a chance to finish growing is basically expected. Love doesn't factor into it. Marriage is economics: land for cattle, families for alliances, daughters for diplomacy. Your consent is optional. Your signature isn't required. Once married, you're legally absorbed into your husband's life, like a piece of furniture that occasionally cries. Your purpose: produce heirs, obey orders, maintain the household, and never raise your voice above a polite whisper. If you complain too much, you risk being branded a nag, or worse, a witch. And the punishment for witchcraft comes with the fun options of drowning, burning, or being tossed off something tall. Depends on the season. Childbirth is its own medieval lottery with terrible odds. No prenatal care, no sterile gloves, no pain relief, no surgical tools beyond whatever the midwife boiled once 3 months ago. Even small complications can end your life in minutes. Some women live through 10 births. Many don't survive the first 2. And afterward, there's no rest. The moment the baby cries, you're back to work, caring for your newborn while still bleeding, still exhausted, still living on watery ale and fear. If you're widowed, you're vulnerable. If you're unmarried, you're suspicious. If you show too much independence, you're dangerous. Knowing herbs, being opinionated, or simply giving someone side-eye on an unlucky day could be enough to spark gossip, which could become accusation, which could turn into a bonfire. Even joining the church doesn't spare you from restrictions. Nuns live under strict silence, stricter routines, and spiritual hierarchy that places all women neatly beneath every man. So yes, if you're a medieval woman, you're expected to endure, serve, sacrifice, and smile politely while the world stacks suffering on your shoulders like a devotional workout. You've survived domestic misery, nutritional sadness, and possibly an aggressive goose or two. But just when you begin thinking the worst of the day is behind you, the Middle Ages unveil their other hobby: violence. Everywhere. Loud, messy, unapologetic violence. Forget modern policing. Medieval law and order basically boils down to: pray your local lord isn't in a bad mood, and hope the neighbor with the axe slept well. The streets are chaotic, homes are volatile, and disputes are settled with fists, blades, or occasionally a whole mob. Steal a loaf of bread? You might lose a hand. Tell a lie? Enjoy a pierced tongue. Gossip too loudly? Meet the scold's bridle, a charming middle. Muzzle with a tongue-pressing spike that prevents speaking and encourages quiet reflection on your life choices. If you're accused of something serious, witchcraft, heresy, theft, congratulations, you've earned a ticket to a trial by ordeal. It's exactly as horrifying as it sounds. One version requires you to plunge your arm into boiling water to retrieve a stone. If your arm heals without infection in 3 days, you're innocent. If not, well, better start praying. Another test involves being tossed into a river. Sink, and you're virtuous, but also extremely drowned. Float, and you're guilty of consorting with the devil. Either way, you lose. Public executions are prime entertainment. People bring snacks. Children watch. It's basically a grim community festival with fewer carnival games and more decapitations. Justice is less about fairness and more about spectacle. Domestic violence is normal. Husbands are allowed, sometimes encouraged, to discipline their wives and children. Street fights erupt over trivial insults. A knight's horse has more legal rights than a peasant. And war? Always happening. Somewhere, someone is marching off with a rusty sword to fight in another conflict, fueled by religion, pride, or extreme boredom. Violence isn't a breakdown of medieval society. It is the structure holding it together. By now, you've endured parasites, pottage, punishment, plague, and the ever-present threat of public execution. Surely it's time for things to improve? Nope. Now comes the grand finale of medieval life. Early death. If you make it past 40, villagers may begin referring to you as the Ancient One, which is less a title of respect and more a reminder that statistically, you should have died a decade ago. The average life expectancy lingers around 30 to 40, thanks largely to infant mortality, so widespread it skews the numbers like someone sat on the spreadsheet. Half of all children die before age 5. A fever, a cough, contaminated water, a cold winter, a hungry summer. That's all it takes. If you survive childhood, adulthood greets you already half-worn. By your mid-20s, your joints ache from years of labor. Your back is permanently bent, and most of your teeth resemble loose gravel. For women, childbirth remains one of the leading causes of death, a horrifying gamble every year or two. For men, danger comes daily. Farm accidents, infections, angry neighbors, overzealous tax collectors, highway robbers, or being conscripted into a feud you didn't know existed until someone handed you a spear. Disease sweeps through villages like a broom. Plague, pox, dysentery, ergot poisoning. Take your pick. Famine arrives whenever the weather decides it's bored, wiping out entire communities. Even eating spoiled grain can send you into days of hallucinations before the inevitable end. And funerals? If you're lucky, someone says a prayer before tossing you into the local churchyard. If not, you're buried quickly, quietly, and without ceremony, so the living can get back to the business of not dying. Welcome to medieval life, where every day is a miracle, every meal a gamble, and every sunrise a surprise. Bodies in the Middle Ages were buried fast, not out of respect, but out of sheer panic. No embalming, no carved coffins, no solemn processions. Just a shallow pit, a handful of hurried prayers, and a mound of dirt that looked like it wanted to collapse back in. If the churchyard was full, well, someone might reshape an older grave to make room. Recycling, medieval style. So yes, life in this era was brutally short and constantly stalked by death, the casual, everyday kind. You didn't retire. You simply stopped showing up, and eventually someone noticed. And with that cheerful thought, let's step into what comes next. The medieval dream dies. So, how's your day been? You woke up inside a damp wooden box full of bugs, relieved yourself into a questionable bucket, scrubbed your teeth with hope and a fingernail, ate nutrient-deficient sludge made by sadness itself, worked until your spine begged for mercy, scratched fleas until your skin resembled a medieval parchment, dodged some infections, prayed away the plague, and came alarmingly close to public execution because someone accused you of stealing a squirrel. Welcome to one ordinary day in medieval Europe. Still fantasizing about becoming a knight? Don't. That sparkly storybook version of the Middle Ages, heroic warriors, gowns floating in torchlight, feasts in grand halls, chivalry gleaming brighter than polished steel, is a complete fabrication. A medieval PR campaign centuries before marketing departments existed. The real version? Gritty, grueling, unfair. A world where hierarchy ruled harder than any king, and where your birth determined your funeral more than your life ever could. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were born rich, congratulations, you got softer blankets and slightly better bread. But you were still one unlucky meal or infected arrow wound away from a speedy burial. Even nobles weren't living the fantasy. Castles looked glamorous from the outside, but inside they were freezing stone iceboxes filled with smoke, rats, unhappy marriages, and political backstabbing. Sure, you had a velvet cloak and drank from a golden goblet, but you also had a real chance of dying from a splinter that got infected after a jousting tournament you didn't even want to attend. Simple times were anything but simple. Everything took effort. Everything hurt. Chewing, childbirth, walking, sleeping, all came with consequences. Life wasn't a celebration. It was survival on hard mode, with no cheat codes and no respawning. And if you did pause to think, to imagine a better existence, it didn't matter. There was no upward mobility, no medical breakthroughs, no literacy for most, no escape from your village, except through marriage or death. Google didn't exist to answer, is this rash normal? Spoiler, it never was. Your entire lifetime unfolded inside a tiny radius defined by your hut, your lord's land, the church, and the nearest ditch. That was your universe. But here's the strange, beautiful part. Even in all this misery, humans didn't stop being human. People still laughed, still told stories beside fires, still sang, danced, flirted, argued, and fell painfully, inconveniently, messily in love. Not because life was kind, but because people refused to give up joy entirely. Stubbornness is humanity's default setting. So tonight, when you crawl into a clean bed with soft pillows, warm air, safe water, and a complete absence of plague rats, whisper a tiny thank you to the modern world, and to your ancestors who battled famine, disease, war, superstition, and feudal nonsense, so you wouldn't have to. Now, speaking of people who lived through danger and chaos, let's pivot to one girl from history who refused to accept the role handed to her. Before she was Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia, political mastermind, Enlightenment icon, and power strategist extraordinaire, she was simply Sophie. Born Sophie Friedrich August von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, she arrived into a small German principality with more starch than influence. Her family was noble, yes, but not important, not wealthy, not powerful, just respectable enough to stand in the corner of the room at royal gatherings. But Sophie? Sophie had something her birth couldn't give her. Razor-sharp intelligence, charm sharpened into a tool, and an ambition that hummed beneath her skin even as a child. Her mother, Johanna, was not the affectionate bedtime story type. She was icy, calculating, and devoted entirely to reputation. Sophie's father, a Prussian military officer, was distant in a way that made even strict parenting look emotional. So Sophie learned early to observe before speaking, to smile strategically, and to use silence as self-defense. She devoured books, mastered languages, and soaked up etiquette like a future empress studying the manual, all without knowing she'd one day rewrite the rules of a continent. When Empress Elizabeth of Russia began hunting for a wife for her awkward heir, Grand Duke Peter, she wanted a foreign girl who could be molded, someone grateful enough to be obedient. Sophie was perfect. Noble background, pliable reputation, and Lutheran faith, which she would be expected to swap like a hat at the door. At just 14, Sophie was whisked eastward to the icy magnificence of St. Petersburg in 1744. She arrived shivering in thin German fabrics, with her ambitious mother steering her forward like a pawn in a high-stakes game. But Sophie wasn't a pawn. She was studying the board. To become acceptable, she converted to Orthodoxy, taking the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine. It wasn't just a religious shift. It was a rebirth, a promise that she intended not just to survive this empire, but to shape it. No one looking at that pale, quiet teenager in a fur-lined coat could have guessed that behind her calm eyes, a strategy was forming, one that would one day topple a Tsar. Her marriage to Grand Duke Peter, meant to secure her future, was instead a masterclass in disappointment. Peter was childish, erratic, and more passionate about his miniature toy army than the woman he was supposed to rule with. Some whisper he refused to consummate the marriage for years. He adored Prussia, resented Russia, and recoiled from responsibility. Catherine, in contrast, embraced Russia with hungry dedication. She learned the language, absorbed history, studied strategy, and built alliances quietly in the shadows. Peter played with dolls. Catherine prepared for destiny. The Russian court was a nest of jealousies, spies, whispered betrayals, and shifting alliances. Catherine had to navigate all of it, while being watched, monitored, and judged. Her letters read, her friendships dissected, her loyalties questioned constantly. And yet, the girl who arrived as Sophie, a quiet German teenager, was already evolving into the woman history would one day call great. In a world where alliances shifted faster than snowstorms over St. Petersburg, Catherine learned quickly that survival depended on being the quietest person in a room and the most observant. She mastered the art of smiling without speaking, listening without revealing, and winning loyalty without ever asking for it outright. Officers admired her composure, scholars praised her intellect, and courtiers whispered that she carried herself with the dignity of a monarch long before she wore a crown. Compared to Peter, who preferred tantrums, toy soldiers, and open disdain for Russian customs, Catherine looked like stability incarnate. And behind that calm exterior, she was busy feeding her mind. When the court slept, she read by candlelight Voltaire, Montesquieu, the thinkers who believed reason could remake nations. While others saw a polite young consort simply waiting out her fate, she was building an internal blueprint for a different Russia, educated, powerful, and modern. But one obstacle remained stubbornly in her way: Peter. As long as he sat between her and the throne, she would remain trapped in a powerless marriage to a man spectacularly unfit to rule. So she waited. She prepared. Catherine knew Russia's monarchy wasn't passed down, it was seized, and she intended to take it. In 1762, after nearly 20 years of patience sharpened into purpose, her chance arrived. Empress Elizabeth died, and Peter III finally ascended the throne. But his reign began collapsing in record time. Within months, he had insulted the church, alienated the nobility, enraged the army, and thrown open his affection for Prussia, the very nation Russia had bled to fight. He reversed long-standing policies, mocked the clergy, and even mused openly about divorcing Catherine so he could marry his mistress. The court recoiled. Generals muttered in corners. Priests raised eyebrows. Ordinary Russians saw him as a foreign child king playing dress-up with their future. Catherine could practically feel the empire shifting beneath her feet, softening, leaning toward her. And then she struck. While Peter was relaxing at his summer estate, Catherine mounted a coup so smooth it felt rehearsed. Backed by key military officers, including her lover, Gregory Orlov, and his fiercely loyal brothers, she rode through the capital in full imperial splendor. The imperial guard swore allegiance instantly. By midday, she was proclaimed Empress Catherine II. Peter, blindsided and abandoned, surrendered almost immediately. He was taken into custody and shortly thereafter was found dead. The official report blamed a sudden intestinal spasm. No one believed it. The truth whispered through corridors. Murder, cloaked beneath politeness. And just like that, Catherine, foreign-born, unsupported by lineage, written off as a decorative bride, had taken the mightiest throne in Eastern Europe without triggering a war. But winning the crown was only the beginning. Now she had to keep it. She understood perfectly that power taken through shadows could vanish the same way. Catherine needed to shift from ambitious conspirator to legitimate empress. One the nobles would trust, the army would follow, and the people would accept as their own. So she didn't rest. She reimagined. Catherine wasn't interested in being a ceremonial figurehead. She wanted to redesign Russia from its foundations upward, not just with armies or financial reforms, but with ideas. While Peter worshipped Frederick the Great and cared more about miniature regiments than human beings, Catherine idolized the philosophers. Voltaire, Diderot, the champions of logic, tolerance, and civic responsibility, they were her heroes. She devoured their writings, debated their ideas, and soon used their principles as building blocks for her own political vision. She didn't just admire the Enlightenment from afar, she participated in it. She corresponded with Voltaire for decades, trading flattery, philosophy, and the occasional political defense. She purchased Diderot's entire library to support him financially and invited him to Russia as a guest of honor. Her evenings were spent dissecting legal codes. Her mornings, drafting reforms. Early in her reign, she created the Legislative Commission of 1767, a massive, unprecedented project aimed at rewriting Russia's tangled legal system. Her nakaz, or instruction, was not merely advice for lawmakers. It was a manifesto. It denounced torture, argued for equality under the law, and insisted rulers existed to serve the welfare of their people. For 18th century Russia, this bordered on scandalous. But Catherine knew ideas alone could shatter her reign if mishandled. Russia was enormous, feudal, and fiercely traditional. The nobility enjoyed complete dominance over their serfs, and had no intention of surrendering that power. So Catherine walked a razor's edge, reform where she could, compromise where she must. She softened punishments, broadened education, opened secular schools, and sponsored libraries. But at the same time, she strengthened noble authority to keep them firmly on her side. A philosopher in the eyes of Europe, a strategist in the corridors of Moscow. She wasn't trying to turn Russia into France. She was trying to turn Russia into a stronger Russia. Yet she knew modernization required more than laws. It required expansion. Catherine wanted an empire respected and feared, a power impossible to ignore. If Peter the Great cracked open a window to the west, Catherine intended to remodel the entire house. Under her command, Russia surged outward. She launched campaigns against the Ottoman Empire, not merely for territory, but for influence. She cast herself as protector of Orthodox Christians living under Muslim rule and positioned Russia as the guardian of Eastern Europe. With generals like Alexander Suvorov and her brilliant favorite Gregory Potemkin, she secured Crimea, the northern Black Sea, and access to warm water ports, something Russian rulers had coveted for centuries. These victories didn't just redraw borders, they redefined Russia's identity. These victories weren't just territorial wins, they were statements. With every campaign, every treaty, Every new coastline added to her realm. Catherine was rewriting Europe's understanding of Russia. No longer a distant, snow-covered outsider, the empire began to look like a rising giant, one that had teeth, one that had strategy, one that had her. She didn't stop at conquering southward. She also turned her attention west. Through a blend of diplomatic finesse and cold-eyed opportunism, Catherine stepped into the slicing apart of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Alongside Austria and Prussia, she took piece after piece of a crumbling neighbor until, by 1795, Poland vanished from the map entirely. Russia absorbed huge tracts of land and millions of new subjects, not through a single war, but through calculated political surgery. But Catherine didn't expand with soldiers alone. She also built with philosophy. She founded towns, invited foreign settlers, especially Germans, to cultivate Russian fields, open new trade routes, and reshaped the empire into a patchwork of peoples and cultures, stretching from the frozen Baltic to the warm, glittering waters of the Black Sea. Every report came across her desk. Every boundary shift received her signature. She was not simply ruling the empire, she was architecting it. Some accused her of gluttonous expansion, of imperial hunger wrapped in Enlightenment rhetoric. Catherine disagreed. To her, empire wasn't greed, it was duty. A great sovereign, she believed, was measured by her ideas, yes, but also by the lines she drew on the map. She wasn't content to inherit Russia. She wanted to transform it into a civilized colossus feared by its enemies, admired by its neighbors, and loyal to her above all. But for all her military brilliance, Catherine's fame wasn't forged solely on battlefields. It spread in whispers down palace corridors, across European salons, and through the ink of scandalous pamphlets, because Catherine's personal life was almost as legendary as her politics. She had lovers, plenty of them, not in secret, not in shame, but with deliberate, curated confidence. Young, polished, ambitious men drifted through her private chambers like a rotation of portraits in a gallery. Some stayed weeks, others years. A few earned titles, lands, and generous pensions. Those who bored her were dismissed with surprising kindness and often a polite note of thanks. If nothing else, Catherine was orderly. The most defining of them all was Gregory Potemkin, warrior, statesman, visionary. Their relationship defied classification. Part romance, part alliance, part intellectual partnership. Many scholars believe they secretly married. Whether or not they did, what's undeniable is that Potemkin was more than a lover. He was Catherine's political mirror. They plotted campaigns together, dreamed of a southern empire together, and forged the blueprint for Russia's expansion into the Black Sea region. Potemkin built cities. Catherine built legitimacy upon them. But Europe couldn't resist sensationalism. Pamphleteers painted her as a deviant. Rumors spread like wildfire. Satirists portrayed her as hungry for lovers, power, and absurdly, even animals, the grotesque horse rumor that history now recognizes as pure slander invented long after her death. The obsession wasn't about truth. It was about fear. Here was a woman who ruled like a man, thought like a philosopher, and refused to apologize for pleasure. That alone made her dangerous. Ironically, Catherine herself approached relationships with a level of reason that her critics sorely lacked. She believed affection and governance could exist separately without chaos. She didn't blur the two. She compartmentalized them. Her lovers were often talented administrators or military officers, whose loyalty she rewarded and whose usefulness she maximized. When their season passed, she released them gently. Her private life didn't fracture her power. It reinforced it. But even Catherine the Great, with all her mastery, wasn't immune to danger. And in 1773, it arrived wearing a ragged coat and a beard. Yemelyan Pogoshev, a Cossack soldier with a gift for persuasion, declared himself the true Peter III, Catherine's supposedly deceased husband. Ridiculous, yes. But for Russia's desperate, overworked, heavily taxed peasants, his claim didn't need to be real. It only needed to be convenient. Pugachev promised the one thing they craved more than bread: freedom. No serfdom, lighter taxes, land for the common folk. His message exploded through the Volga region. Villages rose up. Fortresses fell. Entire noble families were wiped out. For a terrifying moment, Catherine watched the foundations of her empire tremble. This wasn't the Ottoman army or Prussian intrigue. This was her own people, rising from the dirt with pitchforks and fury. Pugachev's rebellion became the largest peasant revolt in Russian history. Catherine recognized the threat instantly. This was not a revolt that could be reasoned with. It had to be crushed. And so she unleashed disciplined battalions, seasoned generals, and the full weight of imperial force. By 1774, Pugachev's rebellion lay in ruins. Pugachev himself was paraded through Moscow in an iron cage, then executed, his fate a spectacle and a warning. But the rebellion changed Catherine permanently. Before Pugachev, she dreamed of Enlightenment reforms reaching the peasantry. After Pugachev, she understood the brutal truth. Russia was not France. Serfdom was the backbone of noble power, and noble power was the backbone of her throne. If she pushed too hard, she could lose everything. Her reforms cooled. Surveillance tightened. The grip of the nobility grew stronger. Pugachev had died, but his shadow lingered. By the time Catherine entered the twilight of her life, she had sat on the throne for more than 30 years, longer than any woman in Russian history. She had taken power in a coup, reshaped an empire with her mind, and held it together with her will. Under her rule, Russia grew by more than 200,000 square miles. Crimea became Russian. Much of Poland disappeared into her realm. The Black Sea, long forbidden to Russian ships, opened like a new chapter. These were not just military triumphs. They were permanent changes in geography and destiny. But Catherine's legacy reached far beyond borders. She brought the arts to Russia, founded what would become the Hermitage Museum, amassed cultural treasures, and corresponded with the greatest thinkers of her century. She didn't just rule Russia. She illuminated it. Her court transformed into something Russia had never seen before, a gleaming crossroads of intellect, culture, and ambition. What had once been dismissed as a cold frontier in the eyes of Western Europe was suddenly buzzing with artists, philosophers, architects, and scholars. Catherine didn't just reign over Russia. She curated it. She founded schools even for girls, a radical idea at the time, and encouraged the printing of books. She championed literacy, conversation, and thought. And when smallpox ravaged Europe, she didn't issue a proclamation from afar. She rolled up her own sleeve and publicly took the inoculation, sending a message to her people. Science over superstition. It was an act of courage in an era terrified of needles, disease, and innovation. But Catherine's brilliance didn't erase the contradictions of her rule. She loved Enlightenment philosophy, quoting Montesquieu and admiring Voltaire, yet she never freed the serfs. In fact, the institution dug even deeper into Russian soil under her reign. Her reforms, impressive on paper, mostly existed at the higher levels of society. She polished the imperial facade, but left the foundations, inequality, serfdom, feudal power, largely untouched. Still, her leadership brought a sense of direction to an empire that had long drifted between stagnation and chaos. Catherine understood that a throne wasn't something you inherited like a piece of jewelry. It was something you held through constant calculation. She ruled because she forged alliances, read between the lines, and stayed 10 steps ahead of opponents who underestimated her. She was called countless things: manipulator, despot, visionary, libertine. Yet the word that fit best was simple: effective. By the time she died in 1796, Russia stood taller than it had in centuries. richer, bigger, more culturally alive. She left behind a crown that no longer wobbled, and an empire that bore her fingerprints on every frontier. Catherine didn't merely sit on a throne. She fought to keep it. She shaped it. And eventually she became part legend, part ruler, part myth. A figure whose name, even now, feels carved into the stone of history. But power is never simple, especially for a woman ruling a world shaped by men. Behind Catherine's iron authority was someone who knew how fragile her position truly was. She wasn't Russian by birth. She had seized the throne in a coup, and she governed a nation that barely tolerated female leadership in the first place. Every day was a tightrope walk, and she never once slipped. She devoured books, filling her nights with philosophy, and her days with reports, letters, treaties, and memos. She edited legal drafts herself. She read foreign dispatches word for word. Her work ethic would have crushed lesser rulers. Catherine didn't treat the crown like an ornament. She treated it like a full-time job with no days off. Yet for all her power, she lived a strangely isolated life. The palace gleamed, but trust was scarce. She kept her true thoughts locked behind sharp eyes and carefully worded letters. Her son Paul, distant both emotionally and politically, became a looming worry. She feared he would dismantle everything she had built the moment he inherited the throne. Her great love, Gregory Potemkin, evolved from passion into one of the deepest friendships of her life. But when he died in 1791, the loss hollowed her. The woman who could steady an empire could not steady her own grief. Catherine understood image better than almost any monarch of her age. She sculpted her public persona the way an artist shapes marble, deliberately, strategically, beautifully. She was the mother of Russia, the enlightened sovereign, the builder of cities, the warrior empress, the patron of the arts. But beneath every royal portrait was someone who had clawed her way through betrayal, revolution, and relentless scrutiny, and survived. When she died, she left behind not just a transformed Russia, but a stack of questions history still argues over. Should she have freed the serfs? Did she compromise her ideals to keep the nobility in line? Was she a visionary constrained by her era, or a ruler who wielded Enlightenment philosophy only when it suited her? No matter how historians debate her choices, one fact remains. She earned the title she never awarded herself, the Great, not because she was gentle or just or flawless, but because she seized power in defiance of everyone's expectations and wielded it with unshakable intent. She didn't simply inherit a crown. She rewrote the definition of deserving one. Far from Russia, in the dense, humid forests of Chiapas in southern Mexico, an entirely different mystery was unfolding. Deep among the ruins of Palenque, a jewel of the ancient Maya world, stood Temple 13, a smaller pyramid overshadowed by its famous neighbor, the Temple of the Inscriptions, where the legendary King Pacal rested. In 1994, archaeologist Fanny Lopez Jimenez led a team surveying the structure. They didn't expect much. Temple the 13th was considered modest compared to the monumental tomb of Pacal, but then they noticed something unusual, a sealed chamber hidden beneath the structure, undisturbed for over 1,000 years. When they broke through the stone and descended into the darkness, they found a sarcophagus coated in an eerie silence. As the lid was raised, a cloud of crimson dust billowed into the air, vivid, shimmering red. The walls, the floor, the coffin, the bones inside, everything was stained with powdered cinnabar. And within that red mist lay a skeleton. The bones belonged to a woman, small and fragile, but adorned like royalty. A jade mask rested over her face. Her remains were surrounded by exquisite ornaments, shell diadems, jade beads, delicate ear spools. Her burial radiated wealth, status, and reverence, but no glyphs named her. She was one of the richest female burials ever uncovered in Mesoamerica, and no one knew her name. Archaeologists called her the Red Queen. She likely lived in the 7th century, during Palenque's golden age, possibly a queen, a high priestess, or even Pakal's wife. But her tomb was hidden deliberately, sealed off, untouched by looters. Her burial wasn't meant to be remembered through inscriptions, but through ritual, through color, through mystery. And the strangest, most haunting part wasn't the jewelry or the jade mask. It was the red. Cinnabar, crushed mercury sulfide, coated her like a second skin. To the Maya, this wasn't decoration. It was sacred. Red was the color of life, death, sacrifice, and rebirth. Covering the dead in cinnabar was believed to guide the soul into the next world, transforming them into something divine. But cinnabar is toxic. Prolonged exposure causes neurological damage, tremors, hallucinations, even death. The Red Queen had been buried in beauty. She had also been buried in poison. The Maya may not have known the chemical dangers of cinnabar, but they understood its spiritual weight. To them, this red powder wasn't just pigment, it was a force. It symbolized vitality, transformation, blood, and the breath of the gods. It was sacred, volatile, and powerful enough to belong only to the highest ranks of the living. And the dead, very few people in Palenque received the honor of being covered in cinnabar. King Pakal, the ruler whose pyramid dominates the site, was one. His body, like the Red Queen's, had been entirely bathed in the crimson dust. That single shared detail lit the spark of speculation. Whoever she was, she belonged to the same spiritual category as Pakal, not merely royal, but divine. Her skull rested on a pelt of jaguar fur, the animal of kings, warriors, and night gods, a creature believed to walk between worlds. Around her were bone implements, obsidian blades sharp as frozen lightning, and tiny jade figurines shaped for rituals now lost to time. Every object spoke, not through text, but through symbolism, painting a portrait of a woman cloaked in ceremony and mystery. She had not been sent into the afterlife quietly. She had been ushered in with majesty, completely saturated in the color of sacrifice. Surrounding her remains, coated in that luminous red dust, was a constellation of offerings. Jade, shell, obsidian, arranged not for beauty alone, but for cosmic purpose. These treasures weren't jewelry. They were tools for the soul's journey through Xibalba, the Maya underworld. Beside her ribs lay heavy jade necklaces, cool even after 13 centuries underground. Jade was the jewel of life, the green of maize, the energy of the gods. Owning it was privilege. Being buried in it meant transcendence. For the Red Queen, jade covered her chest, circled her wrists, and framed her ears. In life, she must have moved through Palenque as someone who commanded both respect and myth. Most striking of all was the jade funerary mask placed over her face. Egypt had gold. The Maya had jade, a stone that breathed vitality, endurance, and eternity. The mask was composed of dozens of tiny mosaic pieces, each shaped to mirror the contours of her cheeks and brow. It wasn't meant to resemble her face. It was meant to transform it. To the Maya, this mask wasn't decoration. It was a vessel to guard her identity, shield her spirit, and present her to the gods in the form of an eternal being. Around her lay bone needles, obsidian knives, and shell ornaments, objects that hinted at her role. Was she a healer? A priestess? A queen who performed sacred rites? One bone pin bore faint, intentional markings, a quiet signature from a vanished world. At her feet waited ceramic vessels, sealed since the day they were placed there. They once held food, drink, incense, sustenance for the dangerous journey beyond life. The Maya believed death required preparation, supplies, and guidance. These artifacts represented survival, not luxury. The tomb wasn't overflowing with treasure. It was precise, curated, spiritual rather than extravagant. It was a map for the soul. Through these remnants, the Red Queen becomes more than a skeleton. She becomes a testament to a civilization that saw death not as an ending, but as evolution. Yet for all the grandeur of her burial, one detail loomed louder than any offering. She had no name, no inscription, no glyph, no carved title. The silence around her identity became the heart of the mystery. From the day her tomb was opened, scholars chased clues. The most compelling theory pointed to one woman, Sakbu Ajah, the wife of Pakel the Great. Sakbu wasn't a passive royal spouse. She came from a noble lineage and entered the Palenque dynasty as a political and spiritual asset. She bore multiple sons who later rose to prominence, and she participated in ceremonies that shaped the kingdom's identity. If any woman deserved such an elaborate burial, it was her. The tomb's location also fueled this belief. It sat only a short distance from Pakel's monumental burial chamber. The closeness felt intentional. A royal pair, united in life and placed side by side in death, like twin pillars of Palenque's golden age. And then there was the cinnabar. Only 2 burials in Palenque received the full crimson treatment, Pakol's and the Red Queen's. Such an honor wasn't random. But mysteries rarely resolve neatly. When DNA tests were performed on both sets of remains, the results were puzzling. The Red Queen shared no direct maternal link with Pakol, but that didn't disprove marriage. Blood relation wasn't required for a wife. Some scholars suggested she might have been Sak Kok, Pakel's powerful mother, who ruled as regent before he came of age. Others believed she might have been a high-ranking priestess, a sister, or an elite ancestor whose inscriptions simply didn't survive. Still, the strongest evidence pointed to Tsiakbu Ajah, queen, mother, matriarch. But perhaps the absence of a name was intentional. In Maya belief, immortality wasn't guaranteed by writing. It was earned through ritual, memory, lineage, and the cosmic threads woven between the living and the dead. The Red Queen remained suspended between history and myth, a woman who ruled, remembered not through text, but through color. To understand her, we must understand the world that shaped her. In Maya society, royal women were far from ornamental. They were political architects, keepers of lineage, advisors, priestesses, and at times rulers in their own right. Dynasties depended on them, not only for heirs, but for legitimacy and alliances. Their marriages weren't private affairs. They were geopolitical treaties. Their bloodlines determined successions. Their participation in rituals kept cities spiritually anchored. Take Sak Kekuk, for instance, the formidable mother of Pakal. When the throne of Palenque lacked a male heir, she stepped in. She governed not as a placeholder, but as a sovereign who safeguarded the kingdom until her son was ready to rule. Maya women shaped the empire from behind jade masks and ceremonial thrones, and from within the shadows of temples and courts. The Red Queen, whoever she truly was, belonged to this lineage of power, and that is why her tomb still pulses with mystery. Not because she was forgotten, but because she was remembered in the old Maya way, in whispers, in symbols, in red. She wasn't a ceremonial accessory. She wasn't a decorative figure beside a king. She was a ruler in her own right, a woman who issued orders, commissioned buildings, and shaped the political ideology of Palenque from inside the palace walls. Without her, Pakel's dynasty may never have risen into the golden age historians admire today. And she wasn't some isolated exception either. Across the Maya world, in Yaxchilan, Naranjo, Calakmul, inscriptions reveal women performing rituals, negotiating alliances, overseeing wars, even sitting on thrones. They appear on stelae with towering headdresses, wielding scepters, stepping into battle scenes, or conducting ceremonies meant to bind heaven and earth together. She wasn't a ceremonial accessory. She wasn't a decorative figure beside a king. She was a ruler in her own right, a woman who issued orders, commissioned buildings, and shaped the political ideology of Palenque from inside the palace walls. Without her, Pakal's dynasty may never have risen into the golden age historians admire today. And she wasn't some isolated exception either. Across the Maya world in Yaxchilan, Naranjo, Calakmul, inscriptions reveal women performing rituals, negotiating alliances, overseeing wars, even sitting on thrones. They appear on stele with towering headdresses, wielding scepters, stepping into battle scenes, or conducting ceremonies meant to bind heaven and earth together. Their names were once spoken with reverence, their titles carved in elegant glyphs, their images painted across palace walls. Time erased many of those details, but archaeology is slowly stitching them back together. When the Spanish arrived centuries later, they projected their own patriarchal assumptions onto Maya society. They imagined women as shadows behind their husbands. But the stones say otherwise. The Maya world was never that simple. Power was negotiated, shared, contextual, and royal women often formed the backbone of dynastic legitimacy. Through that lens, the Red Queen becomes more than a nameless figure resting in a crimson cloud. Her burial, packed with sacred materials and placed beside Pakal's own mortuary temple, suggests she wasn't merely adjacent to power. She was power. Her jade mask acted as a permanent face for eternity, a declaration that her identity mattered even if her name was never written down. Her bloodline may have been the thread that stitched Palenque's royal story together. In Maya culture, a queen wasn't there to look regal. She was lineage itself, a vessel of ancestry, a ceremonial authority, the human bridge between gods and kings. The Red Queen may be anonymous today, but in her own world, she spoke loudly. Her burial makes that painfully clear. Because this woman wasn't just placed in the ground, she was installed like a cosmic symbol inside a chamber designed with intention and mythic precision. Her tomb was architecture and theology woven together. The archaeologists discovered her within Temple 3, one of the more modest pyramids, resting near the center of Palenque. Yet its position, directly beside the towering temple of the inscriptions, where Pakal lies, is the loudest clue of all. Maya temples were not dropped onto the landscape at random. They were oriented according to astronomy, dynastic narrative, and the geography of myth. Temple 3 rises humbly compared to its famous neighbor, but it holds something more intimate, a hidden crypt untouched by thieves, protected by time. To reach her chamber, one must descend a steep, narrow staircase. It feels less like a hallway and more like a ritual descent into the underworld. Inside, the chamber is small, plain, carved from stone, sealed for over a millennium. No murals, no carved glyphs. Nothing to tell her story. And yet the emptiness feels intentional, as though silence itself was part of the ceremony. This wasn't a room for the living to admire. It was a room for her spirit to awaken. At the center sits her limestone sarcophagus, simple yet imposing, a sister to Pakal's massive carved coffin. His lid shows cosmic serpents, world trees, and myths of rebirth. Hers is quiet, directing attention not outward but inward, toward the ritual performed upon her body. Her tomb faces east to west, aligned like the sun's path. Birth, life, death. This alignment was no architectural accident. For the Maya, direction was destiny. Her final chamber wasn't just a grave. It was a transformation chamber, a sacred capsule meant to carry her from the world of light into the tunnels of the afterlife. Because the Maya didn't see death as an end. They saw it as a journey into Xibalba, a shadow realm of trials, illusions, and gods with skull faces. And queens weren't just tossed into this realm. They were prepared for it, equipped with tools, symbols, and sacred materials. The Red Queen's burial reflects this belief with stunning clarity. The cinnabar, thick, red, dangerous, was a ritual skin meant to mark her as reborn. The jade mask served as the face her soul would wear before the gods. The bone needles and obsidian blades hinted at bloodletting rites, a practice used to call on deities or nourish them with sacrifice. The ceramic vessels likely held offerings to sustain her: cacao, maize, water, fermented drinks. Everything in that chamber was there to prepare her for an afterlife that was neither peaceful nor guaranteed. The Maya believed that only those properly equipped could navigate the labyrinth of Xibalba and emerge transformed. For rulers, death was less about mourning and more about ascension. They became ancestral beings, protectors, semi-divine forces guiding the dynasty from the other side. The Red Queen, wrapped in sacred red dust and resting in a pyramid, was no exception. Her death was a beginning, a coronation on the other side. And just a few paces away, the counterpart to her cosmic transformation rests: Paykal the Great. His tomb inside the Temple of the Inscriptions is one of the most spectacular in all of Mesoamerica, an architectural hymn to rebirth and divine kingship. Yet it's the Red Queen's placement that tells the deeper story. Her sarcophagus lies directly beside his, not miles away, not in a different complex, but practically next door. In a city where architectural placement equaled status, identity, and cosmic meaning, such proximity was deliberate. This wasn't coincidence. It was statement. Many archaeologists believe she was Sakbuajau, Paykal's queen, partner, and political counterpart. Though her tomb bears no glyphs, the parallels between their burials are too significant to ignore. Both were bathed in cinnabar. Both rested in temple crypts. Both were adorned with jade. And both were treated with the kind of reverence reserved only for those whose names shaped history. The Red Queen's identity may be uncertain, but her importance is not. Her resting place, her offerings, her symbolism, all of it whispers the same truth. She mattered. She ruled. She was remembered in ritual, if not in words. And in a civilization where death was merely another doorway, she stepped through it not as a forgotten figure, but as a queen made eternal in red. The rituals surrounding Paykal and the Red Queen reflect each other like two chapters of a single cosmic story. Paykal's sarcophagus lid famously shows him descending into the jaws of the underworld tree, a cycle of death, sacrifice, and resurrection carved in stone. The Red Queen's tomb has no such carved mythology. Her chamber is bare, but her symbolic meaning rests in the pairing itself. If Paykal was the sun, traveling each night through the dark belly of Xibalba, only to rise again, then the Red Queen may have embodied the moon, the luminous feminine force whose phases govern time, cycles, fertility, and mystery. Together, they form a cosmic dyad, masculine and feminine, king and queen, solar fire and lunar reflection, structure and ceremony. Maya rulership was never a one-person performance. It was relational, a balance of energies. A king without a queen lacked legitimacy. A queen without a king could not anchor the dynasty. By placing the Red Queen's tomb mere steps from Paykal's, the Maya weren't simply burying a consort. They were preserving a cosmological partnership. In death, they remained side by side, as if eternally echoing their roles in life. Two presences bound not just by marriage, but by myth. Their tombs speak a language older than glyphs. The story is written in red dust, in stone, in silence. One of history's quietest, yet most profound dialogues. Though her name was erased by time, the Red Queen of Palenque continues to stand as one of the most intriguing and powerful women of the ancient world. Her sealed chamber, hidden for over 13 centuries, now reaches across time to remind us that some of history's loudest figures never needed inscriptions at all. We may never know exactly who she was. No glyph recorded her identity. No mural captured her deeds. And yet the opulence of her burial, the jade mask, the crimson cinnabar, the ceremonial items, the sacred placement, all testify to a woman whose importance radiated far beyond titles. She held real power, spiritual authority, and elite blood. Her rediscovery forces us to reconsider long-held assumptions. She reopens conversations about Maya women, not as passive figures, but as leaders, diplomats, ritual specialists, and political anchors. For generations, Pakal has dominated the narrative of Palenque's greatness. But the Red Queen's unexpected reappearance shifts the light, reminding us that dynasties are upheld by more than kings. Her legacy lives not just in artifacts, but in the questions she inspires. Every bead of jade, every streak of mercury red powder, every structural choice within Temple 3 suggests intention. None of it was random. Her story wasn't written in stone. It was written in ritual. Perhaps the most extraordinary truth about the Red Queen is not what we have uncovered, but what remains elusive. She is a reminder that history is more than facts. It's an ongoing conversation between the living and the long gone. A mystery that breathes. She rests in red, the color of sacrifice, of blood, of transformation. Her jade mask once hid her face, but now her presence peers back at us through archaeology, science, and imagination. She is unnamed, but not silent, obscured, but not erased. In life she may have ruled a kingdom, but in death she commands something larger: curiosity, wonder, reverence. Her chamber was sealed in stone, her story woven in absence. And even so, she speaks. Frida Kahlo entered the world on July 6, 1907, in the colorful district of Cayocan, in a small village at the edge of Mexico City, long before it became a cultural landmark. Her childhood home, La Casa Azul, the Blue House, would shape her for the rest of her life. It was refuge, chaos, and eventually a museum dedicated to a woman who would redefine what it meant to turn pain into art. Frida was the third of 4 daughters, born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, and Matilda Calderon, a deeply religious woman of indigenous and Spanish descent. Her parents couldn't have been more different. Guillermo, introspective and meticulous. Matilda, strict and emotionally closed. From her father, she inherited sharp observation and artistic discipline. From her mother, an almost supernatural toughness. As a child, Frida was fiercely curious, loud when she felt like it, tender when she chose to be, and always hungry for knowledge. But at age 6, illness struck. Polio. The disease left her right leg thinner and weaker, a difference she later hid beneath long, flowing skirts. Bedridden for months, she spent her days reading, sketching, and thinking. It was during this lonely period that she bonded deeply with her father, who pushed her to exercise, stay mentally sharp, and live boldly despite limitations. Frida was never the kind of girl who dreamed of domesticity. She wanted to become a doctor, a daring ambition for a young woman in early 20th century Mexico. At 15, she earned a coveted place at the National Preparatory School, one of only a few girls admitted. There she quickly became known for her intellect, her mischief, and her unconventional style. She joined a rebellious group of students called the Cachuces, who debated philosophy, challenged authority, and devoured political ideas. Frida dove into radical thinking with the same intensity she would one day pour into her paintings. Even then, long before tragedy reshaped her life, Frida Kahlo was already sculpting herself into someone utterly unmistakable. On September 17, 1925, Frida's world split open. Her life, her body, and her future were divided into before and after. That afternoon, she boarded a wooden bus with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, laughing and arguing in the easy way teenagers do. Then everything shattered. A streetcar slammed into the bus, crushing it against a wall with brutal force. The aftermath was catastrophic. The wooden bus splintered like a matchstick. Frida was thrown, then impaled by a metal handrail that entered through her hip and exited through her pelvis. Her spine fractured in 3 places. Her right leg was mangled. Her collarbone and ribs broke. Her shoulder dislocated. Her foot twisted. Her abdominal cavity was pierced. She was only 18. When the crash scattered bodies in chaos across the street, a stranger draped Frida with a borrowed coat. Someone else noticed something strange. Her skin wasn't just covered in blood, it shimmered. The small pouch of gold powder she'd been carrying had burst open, coating her mangled body in sparkling dust. She looked like a broken statue, glittering and motionless. Frida was rushed to the Red Cross hospital, where surgeons worked frantically to piece her back together. In the months that followed, she endured operation after operation. She couldn't move. She couldn't sit. She spent endless days locked inside a full-body cast, trapped between pain and fever, wondering if she would ever walk or live the life she once imagined. The dream of becoming a doctor slipped further away with each week of immobility. But as her body remained still, something inside her began to ignite. Her father brought her brushes and paint. Her mother devised a contraption to suspend a canvas above her bed. A mirror was mounted so she could see her own reflection. And there, strapped into plaster, surrounded by the smell of disinfectant and despair, Frida began to paint. At first, it was simply a way to stay sane. Then it became instinct. Then obsession. Her own face became her first subject, not out of vanity, but because, as she later said, "I am the person I know best." The crash had shattered her bones, but it also cracked open a door inside her. A doorway into self-invention, self-study, and the surreal landscapes of pain that would later define her art. The girl who once wanted to heal others had found a different calling. She began stitching herself back together, not with medicine, but with color. As Frida lay rigid inside braces and plaster, she discovered that painting wasn't just distraction. It was a new language, one carved from agony, resilience, humor, and fierce honesty. Her canvases were small, painted on metal sheets, pieces of wood, or anything she could prop within reach. Inspired by Mexican retablos, the devotional folk paintings that told stories of miracles and suffering, Frida turned that tradition inward. Her body became the miracle and the wound. She painted herself pierced, split, bandaged, bleeding, but always staring straight ahead, unflinching. In one work, she is riddled with nails like a saint of torment. In another, she stands before a cracked Ionic column, her fractured spine exposed like a ruined temple. She painted her miscarriages, her surgeries, her loneliness, her desires. Nothing was softened. Nothing was polite. Yet there was beauty in the brutality, decoration in the pain, humor tucked among the wounds. Her art was confrontation and confession all at once. She wasn't just telling her story. She was inventing a visual vocabulary that blended Mexican folk culture, surrealist dreamscapes, medical diagrams, and raw emotional truth. By the time she was able to stand again, slowly, painfully, she was no longer the girl of before. Something new had emerged. A painter, a voice, a force. Frida Kahlo didn't just depict pain. She transformed it into something sacred and unforgettable. In 1928, limping but determined, just 21 years old, Frida met the man who would become the most defining and complicated figure in her life, Diego Rivera. He was already a giant in Mexico, both literally and artistically. A revolutionary painter, a towering presence, a man whose murals thundered with history and politics. Frida had long admired his art, but now she wanted his opinion of her own. She marched up the scaffolding where he worked and asked him directly, "You think I have real talent?" Diego looked at her paintings, small, sharp, honest, and said yes. And he meant it. Their connection was immediate and combustible. They talked. They argued. They challenged one another. And soon they fell into a love that burned, healed, and destroyed in equal measure. Frida later said, "There were two great accidents in my life. The bus crash and Diego. They married in 1929. People called it absurd. A massive, rumpled giant marrying a tiny, fiery woman who limped. Her parents famously called it a marriage between an elephant and a dove. But Frida and Diego were drawn to each other's brilliance and chaos. Diego supported her art fiercely, pushing her to exhibit and to take herself seriously as a painter. But he also shattered her heart with a long trail of affairs, the worst being with Frida's own sister, Christina. The betrayal nearly destroyed her. Frida responded with her own lovers, men and women alike. Rumors swirled about affairs with Leon Trotsky, with artists like Georgia O'Keeffe, and with various intellectuals who fell under her spell. She and Diego divorced in 1939, exhausted by pain and infidelity. But a year later, they remarried under new rules: separate finances, separate homes, and no expectations of fidelity. What they shared was bigger than romance. It was creative electricity, ideological passion, and an understanding that they would always orbit each other's lives, whether together or apart. Their union was not peaceful, but it was unforgettable. In the 1930s, Frida followed Diego to the United States as he painted monumental murals in San Francisco, Detroit, and New York. These years broadened her world and sharpened her politics. America dazzled her with skyscrapers and machinery, but repulsed her with wealth, inequality, and hypocrisy. Frida was proudly Mexican, culturally, politically, spiritually. She loved indigenous traditions, revolutionary ideals, and the raw soul of her homeland. In the U.S., she felt like an outsider watching a spectacle of excess. She saw glamorous parties contrasted with suffering workers, opulent corridors shadowed by poverty, art purchased by millionaires, while common people struggled to survive the Depression. Her discomfort seeped into her paintings. She painted industrial skylines dripping with smoke, bodies split between nations, her own identity torn between cultures. She missed Mexico fiercely: the colors, the smells, the earthiness, the humor. In America, everything felt too polished, too mechanical, too hollow. Yet these years also brought her recognition: exhibitions, praise, attention. She was no longer just Diego Rivera's wife. She was Frida Kahlo, painter of pain, poet of the body, rebel with a brush. And little by little, the world began to realize what she already knew. She wasn't merely surviving her suffering. She was transforming it into something immortal. In her letters back home, Frida mocked the United States with the sharp wit only she could wield. She wrote about the endless parade of money, the obsession with polish, the strange hollowness she saw under all the glitter. She longed for Mexico's rawness, the dust, the color, the contradictions that felt honest even when they hurt. While Diego covered massive factory walls with murals celebrating workers and revolution, Frida began her own kind of uprising, quiet, personal, and painted on small panels of tin and canvas. Her style crystallized during this period: fierce, symbolic, wounded, and unfiltered. Some of her most defining works were born in those years abroad. Frida painted herself not because she was vain, but because she was fighting to stay whole. Her body was failing her. Surgeries piled on surgeries. Infections never quite healed. And in Detroit, a devastating miscarriage left her both physically broken and spiritually gutted. Her self-portraits reflected that inner breakage. She painted herself sliced open, bleeding, suspended between worlds. And yet her expression remained calm, never flinching, as if daring the viewer to look away first. In Henry Ford Hospital, she lies on a rust-red bed, crying openly, surrounded by floating tokens of trauma. A fetus, medical tools, a snail, a pelvis torn apart. It was brutal, honest, and unlike anything people had seen. A confession painted in blood and symbolism. By the time she returned to Mexico, she had fully stepped into her artistic identity. Back home, her political fire only grew. She and Diego offered sanctuary to Leon Trotsky when he fled Stalin's assassins. Frida wore Tijuana dresses, not just for aesthetics, but as armor and declaration. a celebration of indigenous strength and Mexican identity. Diego painted the revolution on grand walls. Frida painted its wounds. She showed the cost of fighting, suffering, surviving. Her art became not just emotional, but ideological, a rebellion of color and flesh. When Frida Kahlo returned to Mexico at the end of the 1930s, she was transformed. No longer simply the wife of a celebrated muralist, she had become an artist whose work burned with authenticity and cultural pride. Casa Azul, her childhood home, became a living extension of her spirit. A bold cobalt sanctuary trimmed with yellow, guarded by clay idols, and filled with animals, monkeys, dogs, parrots, roaming as freely as she wished her own body could. Inside, the rooms pulsed with energy. Folk art hung beside revolutionary pamphlets. Pre-Columbian sculptures sat next to jars of pigments and brushes. The air smelled of copal and coffee. Frida painted in her bed, in her wheelchair, in the patio where sunlight spilled through vines. This was her rebirth. Her paintings grew richer, layered with symbolism and cultural identity. In the two Fridas, she painted a dual self, one dressed in European lace, heart exposed and bleeding, the other in indigenous Tehuana clothing, heart whole and steady. It was Frida splitting herself open on canvas, the woman torn between worlds, yet claiming both. In 1939, she traveled to Paris for a major exhibition. Picasso admired her. Breton called her a surrealist. Kandinsky praised her originality. But Frida refused any label. "They think I paint dreams," she said. "But I paint my own reality." Her reality was Mexico, not the sanitized version foreigners romanticized, but the Mexico of blood, myth, duality, and resilience. Her canvases pulsed with hummingbirds, skeletons, ribbons, thorns, cornfields, and hearts. But as her art reached new heights, her health continued to collapse. Surgeries came in waves. Infections chased her from month to month. She painted anyway, with her torso bound in leather corsets, her legs wrapped in bandages, her easel tilted toward her from a hospital bed. Pain no longer visited her periodically. It lived with her, and she turned that pain into paint. As the 1940s progressed, Frida Kahlo's physical decline accelerated. Her spine buckled. Her right leg grew infected over and over. Doctors carved into her body again and again in desperate attempts to save it. At times she was trapped in a rigid plaster corset, unable to move without agony. At others, she was stretched in traction, bones pulled apart to relieve pressure. Yet through all of it, Frida kept painting. These later works are some of her most searing. In the broken column, she depicts herself split down the center, her torso torn open, nails piercing her skin. Instead of a spine, a crumbling ionic column holds her upright. Tears fall from her eyes, but her gaze remains steady, almost defiant. Pain was no longer just a theme. It was her collaborator. Her political voice sharpened as well. She joined the Communist Party. She wrote fiery manifestos. She marched in protests even when it meant appearing in a wheelchair. When she couldn't walk, she let herself be carried. When she couldn't stand, she raised her fist from bed. In 1953, she finally received her first solo exhibition in Mexico, a triumph she had waited her entire life for. Yet she was so ill doctors forbade her to attend. Frida didn't listen. She arrived by ambulance, rolled into the gallery on a hospital bed, adorned in embroidered skirts and flowers, propped up among her own paintings. Guests gathered around her, drinking tequila and sharing laughter while she presided like a queen of color and pain. It was her way of telling the world she wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Her final canvases carried the same duality, bold color layered over deep despair. In Marxism will give health to the sick, she paints herself in a steel corset, held up by Marx's protective hands, as if clinging to ideology for strength. Her last painting, A Still Life of Watermelons includes the words Viva la vida, long live life. Painted near the end, it felt like a sigh, a farewell, a victory. On July 13th, 1954, at just 47 years old, Frida Kahlo died in Casa Azul. The house where she took her first breath became the place where she took her last. The official report blamed a pulmonary embolism, but those closest to her whispered that she was simply done, worn down after decades of pain and surgeries, after a lifetime fighting her own body for sovereignty. Frida Kahlo left behind more than paintings. She left behind a blueprint for turning suffering into truth, for turning identity into art, for turning a broken body into an unbreakable voice. Her life was short, but her legend, like her colors, refuses to fade. Just a few days before her death, Frida insisted on attending a political demonstration protesting the CIA-backed coup in Guatemala. She was frail, in a wheelchair, her body collapsing under the weight of its own suffering. And yet she went. Wrapped in shawls, eyes blazing, fist lifted, she chanted with a crowd that still believed the world could be changed. Revolution wasn't just part of her past. It was the last strong beat of her heart. Her final diary entry was short, almost whispered. I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return. When she died, Mexico mourned a fire that had burned too brightly for too long. Her funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, the nation's grandest cultural hall. Her coffin was wrapped in the red flag of the Mexican Communist Party. People came in waves. Artists, radicals, friends, lovers, admirers, all standing before the woman who had painted her soul raw for the world to see. Diego Rivera was undone. Despite all the chaos they had put each other through, he called her the greatest love of his life. His grief filled the hall like smoke. And then something remarkable happened. Frida refused to fade. At first, she lingered quietly in art circles, uncategorizable, too political for the surrealists, too surreal for the traditionalists. But decade by decade, her voice grew louder. As feminist thinkers in the 1970s and 80s resurrected forgotten women, Frida surged back into the spotlight with a force no one expected. She wasn't simply an artist anymore. She became a symbol of pain transformed into beauty, of rebellion channeled into art, of identity worn loudly and defiantly. Her face, the unibrow, the flowers, the unwavering stare, became unmistakable. Casa Azul became a museum. Her diary was treated like scripture. Her canvases hung in the most prestigious museums across the world. In life, she often lived in Diego's shadow. In death, she stepped fully into her own light. Frida didn't leave behind just paintings. She left behind a challenge, a dare to be real. Today, her image is everywhere. On t-shirts, murals, coffee mugs, tattoos, school books, street art. Her floral crown has become a universal symbol. But what makes her legacy powerful isn't the commercialization. It's the truth beneath the iconography. Frida didn't present perfection. She presented herself, unfiltered, emotional, bold, messy, brilliant, human. She embraced every part of who she was, her disability, her queerness, her indigenous heritage, her politics, and turned them into art that still speaks across oceans and generations. For queer communities, she's a fearless bisexual icon who loved without apology. For women, she's proof that strength doesn't require permission. For disabled artists, she's a beacon showing that broken bodies can create unbreakable art. For Mexico, she is a daughter of the soil, rebellious, folkloric, vivid, eternal. Once dismissed as too strange, too intimate, too raw, her paintings are now among the most celebrated in the world. Works like the two Fridas, Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, and The Broken Column, don't just hang on walls. They reach into the hearts of anyone who has ever hurt and needed that hurt to mean something. She lived on the margins and made the margins magnificent. She lived in contradiction and made contradiction her crown. A communist who wore gold, a woman betrayed who kept loving, a fractured body with an iron soul. And through it all, she painted, with color, with fury, with tenderness, with truth. Frida Kahlo never set out to be an icon. She simply told the truth about herself. And in doing so, she told the truth for millions who had never seen themselves in art before. Today, when we see her face, we see courage. We see resistance. We see vulnerability and fire woven together. We see Frida, not gone, but immortal.